This is the Fatty Joe Show, coming to you from Casa de Carrie, deep in the forests of Nutmeggerville. This show is dedicated to exploring pathways to better health from a holistic perspective. In each episode, we will explore such topics as nutrition, mental and emotional health, fitness, and more. I'm Yogi, your host, and I became interested in studying health after conventional health dogma became damaging and led me to become massively overweight. Against modern convention, I went on a keto lifestyle and I lost over 300 pounds and gained a level of control on my personal health that I never had before. Now I'm on a journey to find out what is myth and what is truth in the ever convoluted world of what is considered healthy. Come join me on a journey of discovery as I look for a path to improve total health. If you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/thefattyjoeshow or patreon.com/carriebrown. If you want to check out all of our social media links and recipes, head to carriebrown.com. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, and subscribe to the show.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fatty Joe Show, coming to you from the Nutmegger Forest at Casa de Carrie Land. This is a Carrie Brown production, and we are here with Toby Jenkins. I had the pleasure of meeting this man before I knew who he was at Keto Fest. We were at a post-podcast recording, and he came up and talked to us a little bit. I didn't know who he was. And then I found his podcast at Paradigm Radio. Was it Paradigm Radio?
Paradigm Radio Show.
Paradigm Radio Show.
Mm-hmm.
Paradigm Radio Show. And he does amazing work on air with dealing with therapeutic situations, mental health with people. And he covers a bit of nutrition and things like that. It's kind of a broad spectrum thing, but it's a really powerful show. It's a very unique show. Not a whole lot of people are doing this. So I do recommend, if you are looking for something to listen to that goes deep into mental health aspects and things, Paradigm Radio Show is a fantastic show to go to. Now, Toby has been a family therapist and relationship therapist, and he also works with businesses and providing therapy and guidance using his business background to help people who are in the corporate world be better in business, deal with their stress that they have to go through, and all kinds of things. So, Toby, I want you to tell our audience about your therapy, about who you are, and let's get a quick introduction going so that people know who you are and why they should be listening to you.
Oh, wow. Thanks for the introduction. That was awesome. I'm a marriage and family therapist, but it's more of a second career. Kind of the funny story with that, when I was a kid and I told my aunt vet, this is for you and one of my cousins, I want to be a therapist when I grow up. They threw their heads back and laughed at me and said, "Boy, you are too sensitive to be a therapist." And so that scared me out of being a therapist. So I went engineering because I've always enjoyed engineering. And then once I finished college and started working, I worked in a great place, Procter and Gamble, and it allowed me to kind of do what I wanted to do once I got my foot in the door. So I gravitated towards people stuff and got HR certified, worked on did a lot of mediation, organizational design, coaching, which I really enjoy. And, along that path, I've always enjoyed helping people get to where they want to get to. And so, my life took a drastic change when I got married. And my wife and I were really committed to one of us staying at home. And it was a game time decision, but when we got pregnant with our first child, it made the most sense for me to stay at home. So I quit P&G and stayed home for 10 years with my two kids. And when the time was right, I went back to school and got a master's degree in couples and family therapy. So I do therapy in private practice, and I also combined my therapy background with my business experience to do executive coaching too. And there's a really there's a fuzzy line between therapy and coaching, and and so you do end up doing a lot of therapy while coaching because a lot of it's about emotional intelligence, understanding who you are, being self-aware, and then I tend to approach therapy and coaching from the standpoint of I don't want to focus on your deficits. I want to focus on what you do well, and let's accentuate that. And if there are ways to bring other resources in to help you with the things you're not that good at, let's do that versus beating yourself up over something you're not too good at. And so, you did a good job introducing my show. That was something I've kind of meandered in by accident, but the purpose of the show really is to normalize mental health and therapy, especially for underrepresented communities, Black men in particular. And so my show, I get other therapists on and experts on, but I also try to get people going through stuff. Um, to talk about their stories because there's a huge stigma with mental health and going to see a therapist, and because you go see a therapist doesn't mean you're crazy or there's something wrong with you. I would recommend that everybody probably needs some therapy sometime in their life,
Yeah.
especially during transition. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about my background there.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head with the stigma of people viewing therapy as a weakness somehow, especially in the male community, and especially in, for the lack of a better term, very masculine, macho businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think that a lot of the issues we're seeing currently nowadays would have benefited with police getting therapy for the situations that they deal with, because if you consider what a police officer goes through the day, they don't get people calling up and saying, "Hey, how you doing? I'm glad you're." They have to deal with the worst aspect of humanity all the time, so it
Absolutely.
becomes something that they kind of already expect, and they're already judging you when you get there because that's what they deal with all the time. Not saying it's right, but that's the problem. And there is a stigma in that field. You could actually be denied raises. People won't want to work with you if you go to therapy. And it's one of the fields that you should be in therapy.
Yeah, and not only that, but I had an interesting conversation about a year ago. I was in a small fender bender, and the driver of my tow truck, we just got to talking, and he was a former policeman, and he had a traumatic event where a child was killed at a scene of an accident, and he held this child, and this child took his last breath. The next day, he quit. And the other part you bring up, not only are policemen dealing with difficult situations, but they're also exposed to traumatic things on a frequency that most of us in the general population are not. And so then to have to put on the stoic shield and say, I'm all right, is unrealistic. So I mean, I know a couple of policemen, and they see things that most of us don't see, and it has an effect on them. It's hard to see the kind of stuff they see and deal with the stuff they deal with.
Yeah, I've been there a bit myself. I one of the fields that I used to work in and I no longer work in was group homes for at-risk kids, domestic
Wow.
violence, sexual assault shelters, and I worked in overseas to help shut down child trafficking brothels.
Mm.
Uh, and here in the U.S., a lot of my residents came from the most severe abuse situations, a lot of child trafficking,
Mm.
and even in the domestic violence shelter, the things that would occur that we would have to read about, it gets to you after a while. And I'm not even dealing with going to see the actual violence. I'm reading about it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I didn't, I'm a man. I'm not going to go seek therapy because I had a different. I
Uh-huh.
probably would have been able to stay being an effective person in that field if I did go and do debriefings with a therapist on a regular basis, because it got to a point where I was just absorbing all this negativity, and it started to reflect outward, reflected in my performance working with the kids, and as well as the adults, and my personal attitude outside of work.
Yes. I mean, you bring up a good point. Most therapists have a therapist, and it's for that reason. And so there are a couple aspects to it. One is that self-care is really, really important um, when you're doing that kind of work. And a lot of people like you and I get into this work because we're passionate about it, and we experience burnout and frequent exposure to those kind of extreme traumatic situations. And so self-care becomes really, really important. Um, like I was saying, most therapists are in therapy themselves. And then, another aspect of self-care that I'm really a fan of is kind of knowing what your limits are and doing things that uh, are that intentionally renew you. So I'm a big advocate. I do practice this myself as well as coach both clients, both coaching clients and therapy clients, to like set aside specific time for you to engage in things that renew you. Like for me, running is a huge part of my renewal. Not only the physical aspect, but this I do some of my best thinking and clearing my thoughts and just meditation while running. And so we tend to, and you sound like you're a helper, someone who likes, and like myself, who likes to come to the aid of other people. And helpers in particular are typically prone to give until they have nothing left. And so it's very important for helpers to take care of themselves.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I've personally seen the burnout, and I thought it wasn't going to be me, and then it was me.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. So it's
Yeah.
you know, I thought I had everything handled until I didn't. So
Yeah. So
the
I didn't mention I also teach. I teach at the University of Kentucky, and one of the classes I teach are for undergraduates going into this kind of work. And so I hammer home to them self-care, 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 boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. And the sad truth is that the average career of a helper is 4 years. And it's exactly what you talked about. You get burned out, especially when it's something you're really passionate about. Compassion fatigue sets in, and it's hard, really, really hard.
and it could, it could be something that happens gradually, but what I often saw, it was a sudden thing of like all of a sudden everything collapsed in. It was like the roof caved in.
Mm,
And
yeah.
that's basically what happened with me. We had a couple incidents at the group home that the roof caved in
Mm,
on me, so to speak, at an
wow.
emotional level. And from that point on, I was a very different individual while working there.
Mm, yeah.
You you are on the show, you talk regularly. I wanted to make sure that I brought this up. You bring a ministry aspect to your work as well, a spiritual aspect, which very much ties into therapy and dealing with your emotions, because in a lot of ways that spiritual help can actually help uplift lift off some of this mental burden off of people.
Sure. So, I would not call myself a Christian counselor, but I use my background and my spirituality and my religious beliefs in therapy. And for sure, I use all those. I use every tool I have available to help my clients get to where they want to go. And so, yeah, whether it's Christianity or tying into whatever faith traditions my clients have, there are tons. There are actually a lot of overlaps between Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, in terms of like being present. All of these faith traditions also have some semblance of helping others. and fulfilling a purpose and being in touch with something bigger than yourself. And one of the things that I see quite a bit is that we a lot of my clients tend to get fixated on something that's short term. So, for instance, and the other thing I'll mention is that, and therapists out here will see this too, is that we tend to have seasons where certain kinds of clients find you, and so I'm in a season of empty nesters or soon to be empty nesters. And so going back to what you're talking about just a minute ago, is that a lot of couples, and couples are one of my favorite populations to work with. But one of the big mistakes we make is once you have children, all your attention focuses on the children, but you only have children for a short window of time. And a lot of couples don't think about long term, like, what are we here for? What can we accomplish together? What is our bigger thing that we're here to do? And the couples I'm seeing now, and that's the other reason why you see high divorce rates at these transition points, is because they haven't thought long term, like, why are we here? And so that applies to couples, but I think I use that approach with my individual clients too. Like, let's think about, why are you here? What's your greater purpose? And let's work to find out what that is and start pursuing that. Because there's nothing, I mean, we have nothing to live for. That's probably one of the worst kind of places to be in. I had a client say to me, I'm not brave enough to live, and I'm not foolish enough to kill myself. And that's a raw statement, but it's a summary of where he is. And so let's try to find out what your purpose is. Let's find out if we can plug into something bigger than you, and find something that's worth living for. So yeah, so so I'm pretty flexible in terms of faith, but I think faith, no matter what tradition it comes from, it is a part of that, defining who you are and having direction in your life.
Yeah, I think it's kind of along the lines of what you're saying, is the empty nesters, l- children moving away or about to move away. As a parent, you have a job to do, is raise that child. And it's very dangerous for people to wrap their identity into their job, that their whole
Mhm.
world is into this job, because that job may not be there later, whether you're a parent
Absolutely. Yes.
or whether you're a truck driver, a cop, or anything. And I think that's it's one of the reasons why we see so many suicides and things that are wrapped around loss of work, loss of job, especially in things where that job is identity, like military, like police
Mhm.
force, like medical profession. People don't
Yeah.
say I work as a soldier. I am a soldier. That
Amazon.
is who I
Yeah.
am. So I think it's much more complex, but I definitely think that is an aspect that plays a role, that you can generalize amongst a lot of populations that experience such problems when they lose that job, that work.
Yes. Absolutely. From a coaching standpoint, I was talking with a friend over the weekend, and a lot of he's an executive level kind of that he's an executive level employee, but a lot of people at that level have problems retiring because it's the other end of the spectrum, but they've identified solely with what they do, and don't have anything outside of that. I kind of saw that with my dad, and my dad retired twice. The first time, I don't think he had much of a plan for what his life would look like without his work, and so he went right back into doing what he did before. And he retired. I think it's now been 18 months the second time, and it's been from afar. I think it's been a tricky transition, trying to figure out, now, what do I do with my time? What do I like to do? What am I passionate about? And so, yeah, figuring that kind of stuff out works a lot better if you have a plan ahead of time. And so, I mean, he's not by himself. I know I've plenty of other people end up in that situation too. So yeah, I like the way you sum that up. I am a soldier. I am a teacher. I am a mom. And, yeah, very well put.
Well, I think that actually transitions very well into a topic that you brought up with me off air when we were emailing each other about the podcast. And you were talking about the stresses of this lockdown situation of COVID and all these disasters. I think that's one of the stressors that come into play is people are not able to go and work and do their job that they have identified with for so long. And sometimes those jobs are gone completely or they're on hiatus. And meanwhile, you're left with an uncertain future.
Yeah, it's been fascinating from a therapy standpoint. I mean, not only from providing therapy, but also living through it with my own family. You know, initially when the lockdown happened, therapy kind of dropped off, and then like after like a couple weeks, we saw an increase. And so there are a couple things. One, I think going into this, like you said earlier, most of us thought, oh, this might last a month, maybe 2 months. And now, what are we, 7, 8 months in? And we don't know when things are going to kind of go back to what they used to be. And I was remarking or talking to a client the other day that I've gotten so accustomed to living this way. Like it crossed my mind the other day, like, oh yeah, my kids are at school are doing school at home. My son's in the dining room. My daughter's upstairs, and that has gotten normal to me. But in general, what I would say, especially from a mental health standpoint, is that if you have never battled with anxiety, you felt it in the beginning, right? So you got to ratchet up, and then those that already had some anxiety, it increased by the same amount. So we're experiencing like this community, statewide, global wide kind of anxiety because there's so much uncertainty with when is this going to be over? What's next? Then you throw in um, all of the other things that are kind of ramping up, like the upcoming political season with elections, the natural disasters, and so like the last month or so, most of the therapists I know are being inundated right now with requests for therapy. And so I haven't put my finger exactly on what it is, other than maybe it's a combination of this kind of fatigue from being in this environment and not having a clear window of when it's going to end. Um, and like you were saying, there are a lot of people that are in situations where their financial security is precarious. Um, their jobs are drying up or going away. But then you've got the flip side of it. You've got people that, because of this situation, they have even more job security. So, I mean, I did 30% more therapy in August than I did in July, and that's been about the load increase of a lot of other therapists. So they're definitely these are definitely tricky times. I'm in my 40s. I've never seen anything like this. um, and so yeah, and I also think kind of the way information flows these days. I think that adds to kind of the anxiety. And so I have a number of clients who are taking who take fast from social media, uh, stop watching the news, etc., just for a period of time. And I do that too, by the way,
Yeah,
just to get
I
away
do
from
as
some.
I do as well. I I think people have to understand that, especially American news, we're not the only ones that do this. I've had the opportunity to travel around the world, but we are particularly good at it. American news is designed to have the same kind of reaction as watching a horror movie.
Yeah.
It's designed to have you sitting there eating the popcorn going, "Oh my god, what's going to happen next?" And
Yes,
this
exactly.
it keeps you in a heightened state of fight or flight, so it's horrible on
Hmm.
your adrenals. It
Hmm.
definitely has an effect on your perception and your mental ability to adapt to new information.
True.
And
Yeah.
it it definitely has a factor in your personal confirmation bias, because
Oh yeah.
if there is a confirmation bias you have personally, there is a news network for you,
Yes.
especially here in the US.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
we're seeing this stuff come into play, and it's I think it's part of the issues that we're having right now, is the level of fear that's perpetuating. And you have people sitting at home now watching TV, hoping for the news of when things are going to calm down. But the news don't tell you about anything that's good that's happening. They just keep
No.
throwing the bad. They keep throwing that fuel on the fire of fear and anxiety. It keeps going.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna pick on my in-laws. They watch a lot of crime story crime shows, and so
Yeah, so does my dad.
yeah, yeah. So anytime something happens, you can't help but think watching all these crime shows probably influences how you hear that sound, and you interpret that as being a threat versus just something fell. And so, yeah, I mean, what we're exposed to has a huge impact on our state of mind and our mental health, for sure. Um, and you just how available information is. I was taught I mean, I can't remember the last time when I was a kid, when there was a press conference or something, you didn't know what was going to be shared. But when's the last time you were surprised at something being announced because you already know? And so, yeah, way different, the way we get information these days. Way different.
Yeah, I find myself seeking out positive books and positive media as much as possible. There are a few online sites there, and if I can pull them up, I haven't looked at them for a while, but if I can find them, I'll add them to the show notes. But there are a few sites, particularly nonprofit news organizations, that deal solely on subscriptions and member services that are not beholden to advertisers
Yeah,
to keep their, and they typically have less of a bias approach, and they typically produce more positive stories for people to read. One of the books that I read a while ago when we were dealing with another hysteria on the Middle East and the issues that were happening over there with the war in Syria was by Malala, by Malala Yousafzai, and I always butcher her last name, but she she has an incredible story, and it's incredibly uplifting and can give you a different perspective than the media is constantly funneling into you.
true. Yeah. Is she the one that was persecuted or survived being
They shot her in
shot?
the head.
Shot her in the head. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Her
Yeah,
story's amazing. Yeah.
yeah. She just recently graduated from college, so I am a big fan of that level of survivor, especially when it comes from a child who's growing up. We have a lot of amazing young people coming up, and always have throughout history
Yeah.
of amazing young people who have stepped up and are educated and carry wisdom beyond their years to
Oh,
become
for sure.
role models in their society, and she's definitely one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting shot in the head. That's yeah. Her
Yeah,
story's amazing.
yeah.
Very
That
amazing.
her big threat was saying that girls should be educated.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that threatened a group of people so bad that they shot her in the head.
Yeah.
So,
And ultimately, it propelled her message even further,
mhm,
which is awesome.
yeah. But it's sad that it had to happen that way to get her message out there.
Yeah.
But we are now dealing with not just COVID, but as we were saying, when you turn on the news, there's something new every day. we tend, because we haven't experienced this in our generation before, we tend to think that it's the bad times are only now because it's only what we perceive to happen. Those of us that looked at history can look at things like the Spanish flu happening during World War One, and that this is historically this has happened before, very similar. The only difference is mass media
Right.
coverage.
Yeah.
That is the only real difference. But there was social distancing, people were wearing masks, there was lockdowns, there was isolations, there was quarantine. We've been doing quarantine since the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
So this is nothing new. It's just new to us. And because it's new to us, we're having a hard time coping with understanding why we have to follow the rules, understanding what's going on. And we're getting, especially in this country, and it's not just us, but I've seen this the same in Europe as well, angry because it's not ending when we
Yeah.
thought it. I think personally, it's an issue with our inability to adapt to new situations because, again, we talked about making our identity about our work, about our life, about what's going on now and what we do. So, what is some good ways for a person to psychologically adapt and deal with these current circumstances that are out of their control?
That's a real good question. Yeah, part of the coping or inability to cope is simultaneously a lot of the things we would normally engage in to cope or recover are not available. And so, even if we just look at it from one angle in terms of how social we generally are, um, many of us, many people are in isolation. And I was thinking about this. I have some golf buddies I play golf with just about every weekend, and since March, we haven't done the man hug, you know, and uh, and it's something that prior to this I didn't think much about, but we were talking about it, and two of these men are they sheltered in place. Their children are out of the home, so it's just the only people they've touched is their wife. And so even simple things like a handshake, the man hug, those things provide relief and comfort for us. So that part has been difficult. And so it's really hard to substitute those things. And so some of the more creative things I've seen, and I think part of it is how flexible you are just in general. But people I've seen that have done really well with this are the people that have created new ways to connect to other people. um, it's amazing how often people use Zoom these days. Now, Zoom does not replace the man hug or touching someone, but it's not a bad, it's not a bad alternative if, as compared to nothing. And so, so that's one thing. And then having to think out of the box and be creative around finding ways within the structure of social distancing and being safe to still kind of engage in things that are renewing. I'm probably sure you've seen, like me, I've never seen as many people out walking and in getting outside where I live, and it's been great. And I've engaged in that with my family as well. And so, the other part to this is that COVID hasn't been all bad, and so I'm sure there are things that you've started doing since March that you probably continue to do. And so that's another kind of aspect that I bring up is like, yeah, this has been bad. It's been unexpected, something we've never experienced. But there's some positives that you're experiencing out of this too. And what are those things that you will continue to do? Like for me, the slowdown has been nice. Spending more time as a family has been nice. Um, Taking time to go out and just walk. walking the dogs, stuff I would have skipped normally, has been really really good. So yeah, so we have to be really really intellectually flexible, emotionally flexible, mentally flexible, and find new ways to engage in things that renew us. Um, and it's not gonna be the way it used to be. For um, like last night, football season started, NFL started up again, and it was odd to see it, but there was a part of it was like, okay, that feels somewhat normal again. So even engaging in those kind of things can help things feel like they used to, even though they aren't. But probably the most important thing is being flexible while still being safe and adhering to like wearing a mask, social distancing. Um, but I think the term has been coined skin hunger, because we are communal just in the way we live. We rely on touch, we rely on contact, and that's gone for many of us. So it's yeah, we got to be flexible.
Yeah, I through studying different health aspects, one of the things that I've read is physical contact with a loved one or even a pet can create an endorphin response and can alleviate stress. So with that contact being denied, and there's a different type of reaction when it's a contact between like a spouse versus a friend versus you have a slightly different response, and it's been measured. They've put people in MRIs and CAT scans, and they can see a change in the brain and the brain chemistry that's working there, and to have that taken away without choice is huge. And if you also study
Yeah.
kids kids who are denied contact from their parents or physical contact often grow up to be having a lot of issues. So
Yeah,
that human contact is extremely important.
absolutely.
For for me, my adaptation was kind of weird. I went the opposite direction of most people did
Hmm.
because I was a truck driver up until recently. So I was already socially isolating. I
Okay.
was already not having a whole lot of physical contact and not going out much because I was spending my day driving a truck. The only thing I
Hmm.
had was my dog. And so when I got here and got off the truck 2 days before the apocalypse, the I actually have more physical contact now than I did before. So
That sounds like it could be overwhelming.
yeah, I'm like, I have neighbors. I have so I've kind of had the opposite effect, and even with a lot of people with stress have been stress eating to cope with
Mm.
their things, and they're not necessarily eating the best stuff. But I've even seen some people. I'm very much a part of the keto world as you are, and we've been seeing people that are fit being in lockdown going, yeah, the Twinkies were calling, and they go off their diet. And we're seeing these guys that were used to be like real muscular now. Oh boy, I got the
Yeah.
baby a brewing. So, and
Yeah.
I went the opposite way on that as well. So,
That's a good point. With this big change in how we're living, um, being kind of intentional with eating, because in boredom, I know I drink and eat when I'm bored, and so I've talked to a number of people who've put on the COVID-15 or COVID-20, and a lot of it comes down to this disruption in what they normally do. I think I'll just eat something, and so yeah, that's a big part of of staying healthy while sheltering and doing what we're doing here.
yeah, it's not just the eating too, but a lot of people are now, because they cannot go to a gym because their gym might be shut down. They have reverted to sitting on the couch and watching TV, and their activity levels have gone down because so many people associate their fitness with the gym, and they don't realize, like, it's not that they don't realize, but they don't associate being home or home things with being able to stay fit.
Yes. I struggled with that too, and I broke down and bought a pull-up bar that you put in your door jamb, and some bands. And I had the same kind of reaction, like, well, I can't go to the gym, but it's actually pretty good. And it's one of those things in terms of thinking about being flexible. Doing that is better than doing nothing. And so yeah, I've been doing the home workouts, working out pretty good. Is it like going to the gym? No, but good substitute. Definitely good substitute.
Yeah, it definitely isn't the same as going to the gym, but and I think the gym there's a social aspect. You get to go show off a little bit, you see other people working out to inspire you a little bit. There is a social aspect to the gym that is lost at home workouts, but working out and staying fit and staying active is important for that emotional health because of
Absolutely.
the chemicals that are released, the ability to release the bent up stress. One of the exercises you do is running, distance running, which
Mhm.
is can be phenomenal for emotional health. It has incredible impacts on the brain, some which I wish I could experience because I'm built for comfort, not for speed. So,
Yeah. Built for comfort. I'm not built for
so
speed either.
yeah. So that's a BB King reference. I'm a blues fan, so that's a,
Okay, got
yeah.
it.
So I can't coin that one for myself,
Ah,
but
that's funny.
it, the endurance exercises in general can have an effect on your brain chemistry. Working out to exhaustion can have a massive effect on your brain chemistry, which can be especially good for coping mechanisms right now. And this is something that you definitely partake in.
Yeah, just moving in general. I'm an advocate of movement for mental health and for healing. And so, you mentioned some of the mental aspects or benefits from running. Runners will tell you about the runner's high that you get, um, uh, and it's a real thing. And I didn't start out running because I thought I'd enjoy it. I actually started out running because a real good friend of mine kind of challenged my manhood a little bit, and I thought, well, yeah, I can run, and it's become an integral part of my not only my physical health, but my mental health. And actually, one of my initial strategies before I was keto was I thought I could run from diabetes. I thought, well, if I'm running a lot, then I can outrun diabetes. That's not quite the case. um, so keto has definitely helped. But yeah, like if you are experiencing stress and you got that cortisol build up and you've got your adrenaline system kind of triggered from being in some type of threat situation, doing some type of physical exercise is a great remedy. Even if it's walking, I know we think of walking as not being exercise, but walking is exercise. um, Now, I would challenge. I think everybody can run, and everybody should run because I think we're built to run. Um, but so yeah, so like the runner's high experience. You were talking about the spiritual aspects of therapy before. I And other runners will tell you this that well, I'll tell you a story of how this kind of a spiritual story with running. This is a couple years back, and I had an uncle who passed away the previous week, and while I was running, um, I thought about how I would eulogize him, and it was clear as day, and these words are just coming out of the sky, and if it was coming straight from God for me. And so, and it is one of those things where I couldn't tell you how far I ran that day. I couldn't tell you, but when you get to kind of the runner's high, it feels like you could run forever. And so I finished up my run. I was like, wow, that was amazing. And so I get home, shower up, my phone rings. It's my mom. And my mom says, we were thinking about your uncle's services coming up. How would you like to give some remarks or a eulogy? And it was one of those things I was like, no way. Because I know exactly what I would say. It was an amazing experience. And so running for me is that kind of therapy, where whether I'm running by myself or with other people, it's a great way, and it's a great way to get to know other people, and a great way just to get centered, um, commune with the Almighty, or the faith tradition of your choice. But yeah, running's way more than physical for me. It's emotional, intellectual, relational, the whole ball of wax.
I had the same feelings when I was more of a water person growing up
Mm,
than I was land. So I felt the same way with swimming and surfing and scuba diving,
yeah.
free diving as well. For me, being under that water, it was a spiritual cleansing moment.
Hmm.
It definitely, the stress went away. Um, and even doing underwater meditations, breathing exercises to prepare for diving, for free diving as well as scuba diving, or also surfing, because sometimes you can get trapped underwater and not be able to
Hmm.
come up. So you got to have some pretty good breath control.
Yeah.
So these are the things that I felt doing these activities, and I may have not gotten it from running, because running I was always dealing
Hmm.
with shin splints and whatnot, and especially when I
Hmm.
was having growth spurts. So it kind of like I was like, yeah, I don't want to run. But now I do an exercise called rucking, and we were talking a little bit off here, and it's basically hiking with a weighted pack. You can do it city, you can do it
Hmm.
nature. I like doing
Hmm.
it here because I like being in nature. Like John Muir said, I go into the forest to lose lose my mind and find my soul. So it's it loses your mind of everything that's bothering you, everything that's lowering you down. Find your soul, find your spirituality, find your calm. For that out here, that plays a huge role on me, because I'm not able to swim as much as I used to, or go diving as much as I used to. Uh, but finding that physical aspect that speaks to you, whether it be running, whether it be hiking, whether it be even doing body weight exercises, getting outdoors. There's a great book called The 3-Day Effect, and it talks about how 3 days in nature can really alter your biochemistry that affects your mood.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. So I recommend running. Part of running is you get oftentimes out into nature or some sort of natural surroundings. And I think that could be, along with the working out, part of the effects of that spiritual and mental cleansing.
It really taps into the whole ancestral living. That's one of the basis of keto eating. But for many thousands of years, we were outside. We weren't in these artificial settings. And there have been some interesting studies. Now, I'm a big outdoor runner. I don't do treadmill. I'll run in snow, cold weather. I much prefer that than kind of an artificial setting. But I can't remember where I heard this study, but they compared people walking on a treadmill to people walking outside, and kind of like we were talking about earlier. There's so many other things going on in your body just from being outside, and the people who walk outside experience lower stress levels at the end of their walk compared to people who walked on a treadmill. And the more natural the setting, the better. So actually, like getting out in the woods or getting under some trees, uh, very good for you. So yeah, definitely getting outside for sure is a real good way to do it. And I think we're wired for it. We lived that way much longer than we've lived the way we are now.
Yeah, it's between the rucking and getting outside, and another one of my favorite exercises has become chopping wood. And so it's
Oh
definitely
gosh.
a natural. I get that stress relief of whacking something,
Yeah.
and I'm also doing something to prepare for winter, because we
Hmm.
do heat the house with fire. And so those outdoor exercises speak to me more than powerlifting did, more than getting on the field playing football. It's getting out into nature, whether it's the surfing, diving, scuba diving, going out hiking, chopping wood,
Yeah.
going camping and backpacking. It's that nature aspect that's a big thing.
So when you're rucking, how much weight are you carrying around with you?
I alternate, and so far my largest weight, I can't really calculate my largest weight, but because there's something called coupons, I've learned a lot of the. Well, I got inspired from rucking from a guy named Corey Mordowski, who's the keto rucker.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, so there's a thing they call picking up coupons while you're walking, and it's just you pick up a random object and carry it with you, and they call it coupons. So I know that I had about 70 pounds in my pack from measuring out between bottles of water, some weights that I threw in there. And then on the way back, I picked up a log that had to weigh close to 100 pounds and carried that back as well. So that was my coupon. So that was probably my
Wow.
heaviest. That was probably my heaviest so far.
Wow.
But that real extreme weight, I didn't go very far with it. I went probably about maybe 3/4 of a mile with it before I had
Jeez.
to. Yeah. So, but my rucks have been up to. I've had a few days where I got up to 7 miles with about
Mm.
60, 70 pounds in the pack. But I also read my body signals, and I was having some issues with the knee, pressure in the knee.
Hmm.
So I dialed the weight back. I may ruck with weight one day and spend 2 days walking without weight to recover,
Hmm.
because recovery is a huge aspect as well
Oh, for
for
sure.
me. As I've gotten older, I've learned the importance of recovery.
And listening to your body.
Yes,
So
because
can I count carrying my golf bag as rucking?
yeah, I mean, you're walking some distance, depending on how many holes you're doing on the. I would say, yeah. Generally, rucking, you're not putting the weight down and you're going for distance, but it's still along the same ways, because you're hauling weight and being. I'm not a big golfer,
Yeah.
but I have carried some of those golf bags before, and they can be pretty heavy depending on what you loaded in them. Especially those guys that got radios and stuff inside their golf bags. Like, so I carried a golf bag one time at La Costa Resort when I was younger. When I worked there, I picked up some guy's golf bag, and I'm like, this thing's heavy. He had a beer dispenser in his golf bag.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Ah, wow.
And I'm like,
I keep mine pretty
okay.
light.
Yeah.
Maybe around
So,
20 pounds.
yeah. So I was like, I'm not sure that is the healthiest thing, but hey,
No.
he had his beer. So, but we were talking earlier when we started out, and you were saying that there are certain populations, especially in ethnic minorities, that have a hard time with doing the personal care and therapy. And I
Yeah.
do want to kind of get into this, because I also think this plays a role in what we're seeing in current events, as well as the police not getting therapy, but also for men of color. And you brought up black men, and I would say not just black men, but you look at Native American, you look at Mexican,
Mm-hmm.
you look at a lot of machismo societies
Mm-hmm.
where the men do not go out and talk about their feelings and talk about how things. And I've seen this in especially Spanish influenced cultures of like the Philippines, Mexico, Puerto Ricans. My friends in those areas, definitely, most of them would not consider therapy, even though they may need therapy.
Yep.
So, how do we bridge this sex and racial gap to make therapy a more acceptable and understanding that it is a necessary form of health that you need to incorporate in your lifestyle?
Um, that I got into this work for that very reason. And one of the more recent positive influences on this have been the athletes that have been speaking out about their mental health challenges and making it more okay to go get help. And so Brandon Marshall comes to mind, Kevin Love, um, uh, George for the LA Clippers recently talked about battling with depression, and so those people who are speaking about it really help. But from a historical standpoint, mental health, along with the medical establishment, has a long history of exploiting Black and Brown people. And there is also a huge, time period where the standard or the position of mental health was that of diagnosing people with issues, and it also came from like a white middle class standpoint. And so, from a cultural standpoint, anything that did not fit that culture then was a problem. And so, that's where some of the stigma comes through. And then you brought up some of the cultures that are really high on the machismo, um, and it's a sign of weakness to go talk to someone about emotional issues you may be having. And so, one of the platforms, or one of the things I try to do, not only in my practice but also on my show, is to like invite people into the therapy room that don't normally go. And so, the majority of the men now, one is that there are not enough men doing the work. And so, that's one thing. But then the other thing is to normalize the experience. And so, when you go to see a therapist, especially a marriage and family therapist, it's going to be like talking to a friend. And so, it's very much built on the rapport and the relationship you have. And so, so often, especially for people the first time they come to therapy, uh, one of the assurances they want is, or they're looking for, and they say it overtly but sometimes covertly, is, I'm not crazy, am I? And it's like, no, it's quite normal actually for everyone to struggle with things, especially during transitions. And so from that standpoint, you brought up cops needing therapy for sure. um, there've been a tremendous number of studies examining kind of the mental health of communities on the fringes, and being exposed to repeated traumas. And like, if you think of like uh, communities that experience a lot of poverty, they also experience a lot of trauma, and you can normalize that. And so, one of the interesting aspects to it, that link to exposure to trauma and experiences back to physical mental health, is we talked about the stress response. And so there's a direct link between the amount of trauma that certain communities are exposed to, and then the chronic illnesses that come from being exposed to cortisol all the time. So you see things like diabetes, hypertension, uh, obesity. All those are interrelated with your exposure, and they tie right in. Then you tie in, a lot of these communities exist in food deserts where they're eating a lot of processed foods, and not like whole foods, and it's all very much interrelated. But yeah, a lot of communities, it's even harder to crack that code, especially for men, that it's okay to go talk to someone with about something you may be struggling with. In a lot of these communities of color, the first line of defense is often family. The second line of defense is often their religious organization. And so, from my standpoint, I'm not against going to your clergy or your church for help, but I am an advocate of making sure that that clergy or that church, they're trained, and they're certified to do mental health. Because one of the more damaging things, at least from what I've seen from my own practice, is that people go in these communities, go to their church, and their church clergy are not trained. It becomes a spiritual issue. Well, if you pray harder, then this will get better. Or you're not being a good Christian, you're not being a good whatever. Then you feel like, well, I'm just bad. I'm not a good practicing fill in the blank at your religion. And so yeah, make sure your clergy are trained, and that's what they do. There's definitely benefit to train clergy who approach mental health from a spiritual and religious standpoint. No more than you would want to make sure that if you went to any therapist, they're trained too. So the same thing, but probably the most powerful. I talked about the beginning, prominent male athletes who are speaking out, but word of mouth is probably really powerful. Is probably extremely powerful too. And so if you have key people that you're in relationship with that have a positive experience going to therapy, that goes a long way in terms of like breaking down that barrier to going to therapy. But for the most part, when I get an opportunity to talk to men, I try to demystify it. There's nothing magical going on. I don't have any magical abilities. I don't have any, nothing like that. I'm not diagnosing you. I'm just going to get to know you, probably give you a different perspective on what you're experiencing, and walk with you as you go through this difficult time. Because even in the natural progression of life, we're all going to experience loss. And loss is extremely difficult to deal with when it's expected, let alone when it's unexpected. And so those are the kind of things that, go seek therapy. The other avenue for a lot of these communities of men are through the women that they're in relationship with as well. Often when I do couples work, the female partner or the wife makes the call, and the and a lot of the women will pick a male therapist because their husband will be more comfortable with a male therapist. And so I end up doing a lot of individual therapy with the husband or the boyfriend of a couple coming in to do work, because that man needs therapy individually. So it's not a mystical, magical thing. It's not. There's nothing wrong with you. We all need help from time to time, just with life's transitions and when things happen. And in certain communities, their exposure to trauma has now become normalized, but it's not normal, and it has an effect on you. Even going back around to the kind of the images of police brutality that have been circulating in social media and the news, that's trauma. I can't watch. I've not watched the entire George Floyd 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The most recent one I can't watch, and it's trauma, straight up trauma, and I can't watch.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's very similar to in a lot of ways to what stirred off the protests of the Vietnam War. When these protests started off, people don't realize that it was media that kicked off these protests, because for the first time in history, visual images of real war that were unadulterated, kids getting killed and blown up and everything, hit the media, and it demystified people's perception of going to war and you're a big hero, and it became something else. And I think we're seeing this as well in the current media of the reaction to police and police brutality. And there's a number of factors. We like to try to boil things down to the simplest terms, but and we generally say, oh, it's just racism. It's not just racism that causes this. As we talked about earlier, it's what these police are carrying into every situation they go in. And a lot of it has to do with media too, because when you look at the portrayal of certain racial groups on media, what is the most common things that you see? So what gets drilled into our heads that these people are, when we go and deal with them. And again, it's not just skin color, but if a cop's rolling up on a trailer park with, they're
Yeah.
going to, all these bunch of hillbillies and, there's a socioeconomic aspect as well that leads to perception of things. And bottom line, regardless of what's going on in the situation, it's not a cop's job to be judge, jury, and executioner.
Right. Yep.
And that violates a civil right, regardless of what the skin tone is. And people have been online trying to justify certain situations. Well, they did this in their past. Cop doesn't know that when they're dealing with the situation. Right. Most of the time.
Yeah.
They are dealing with the situation as it presents themselves. And one of the reasons why the brutality kicks into place is the fear that that cop is carrying into the situation. That fear, to me, is the major cause. Now, whether that fear is presented through racism, which is another version of fear, you're fearing the other, you're fearing the other tribe because the other tribe may come in. It's an ancient human response that we have not evolved past. A lot of us haven't. Whether you're fearing because of previous situations you dealt with, that fear is what's going to create a problem in the situation. And the backlash because of people seeing this over and over happen to certain particular communities. I have family that was Native American on both my mom and dad's side, and you have seen in those communities as well that it doesn't even get aired as much. People don't report it as much because it's such a small population. But we've seen this level, and there's always a cause and effect, and there's many people that are not participants in the racial aspects. They're not carrying that fear in, but yet, like a man going into a relationship with a woman who was formerly abused, they may have to pick up some of that baggage of that former abuse.
Very true.
And so that's kind of what happens in our society, that the people that weren't participating in it now are feeling the repercussion of the people who caused it in the first place. And that goes with the cops, that goes with the Black community, that goes with the white community that's feeling the backlash from the Black community.
Yeah.
And
I would say, the recipe, one of the early steps of creating that kind of division or hatred is otherizing. When you can determine that they are, whoever the they is, they're not like me. And that's usually the beginning of being able to oppress, to hate, etc. I see it in the LGBTQ community as well, because basically cisgender people who have something or homophobic, they begin to create separation. Well, they are not like me, and so that's usually the recipe. And so, one of the remedies for that is authentic relationships.
Those authentic relationships can really dispel a lot of fears.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't have enough of those.
I want to touch on one thing, and then I'm going to ask some closeout questions. But one of the other perceived hindrances to seeking therapy comes from a socioeconomic standpoint, regardless of the culture. Therapy often is viewed as a luxury. And if you don't have the money, then your therapist becomes your barber or your bartender for a man, or your, the ladies at your salon or whatever the place that you frequent, religious organizations. And oftentimes that therapy comes from an untrained person.
Yep.
And there is a stigma within a socioeconomic background, again, regardless of the culture, of seeking therapy, because it's something that, one, they view people that have the money to go do it as soft and weak, and they don't want to be perceived that way. they view it as a luxury they can't afford.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so what are some ways that we can show people that there are avenues to therapy, there are resources for you to see a trained therapist, even if you're not at the socioeconomic standpoint? And how do we reduce that stigma of it being therapy being a luxury rather than a necessity?
That's you mentioned the socioeconomics, and I would say like after past a certain point socioeconomically, it becomes like a status thing where it's cool to have a therapist or my therapist. I'm I, I'm amazed that at any given time somebody's probably saying, "Well, my therapist Toby said this," or "My therapist Toby said that," and so like above a certain threshold, it's status, right? And I would say like systemically, the and I'll tie this back to like to affordable healthcare. Um, Mental health has been kind of a side thing from the medical establishment. And so, how you make it more accessible is to make it more holistic. And from an insurance standpoint, should fit right in with your medical coverage as well. And so, like where I am in the state of Kentucky, it's become a political hot potato. The Democratic governor, a couple before the Republican we just had, expanded Medicare, and so we started seeing all kinds of people with the ability to come and get therapy, and it's been wonderful. And then we had a Republican governor come in right after that and chipped away at it. And so, making it more accessible and affordable through Medicare, it would be awesome. But also, the other part of it, it's a business too. Therapists have to feed their kids and feed their families. And so there's some built-in expense to it. And so even, I would say right now, the majority of the therapists I know are usually taking some type of insurance. So if you're uninsured, that is a barrier to being able to get mental health care, at least from someone who's certified. So I guess the long-winded answer to your question would be systemically making it more available through like Medicaid expansion, making it part of holistic healthcare, and not just thinking about our healthcare as being going to see your medical doctor. So mental health should be wrapped in there too. And bigger hospitals are starting to include mental health as part of it. But from a business and insurance standpoint, it's still treated as a separate thing.
Yeah. And one of the I'm not against healthcare, the Affordable Healthcare Act and things like that. But I often think that when politicians handle things, they can take a beautiful concept and screw it up.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I've always felt is if you're going to have a affordable healthcare system, it should be focused primarily on preventative care, which therapy would definitely fall into those areas. You
Hmm.
could save so much money for the national GDP, for the individuals, for employers, by getting more democratized care out to the people in an affordable way, especially when it comes to things like nutrition, therapy, things that will prevent those chronic illnesses, or those, as we said before, the ceiling caving in on somebody, which means they're
Yeah.
not in work anymore. They're not able to make money. They're more uh, they're they're locked into government assistance, and now
Hmm.
no longer are participating in being a benefactor to the community, but now a burden to the community. These are ways that we can, as a society, help, instead of giving person a hand out, a hand up, to help lift them up and help somebody else become successful so that they can take care of themselves and be self-sufficient.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was the it was. I'll put it this way. There were a number of people that I saw with the Medicare expansion in my state that for whatever reason lost their insurance, And we're talking about these populations. They would benefit most from having access, and so I continue to see them for free because they needed it. And so, and especially, I'll tell you, where I live in Kentucky, the opioid epidemic hit us pretty hard, and a lot of these people that were fighting with addiction are kind of on the margins socioeconomically. And so having access to mental health care and fighting through addiction was invaluable. I mean, it has to economically benefit our society and the economy uh, to be able to administer that kind of service to the population. And so it's definitely not a waste of money. It's a benefit to everybody to be able to have access to good care, not only addiction recovery care, but you generally need mental health care to go with it. And so, yeah, it's for the greater good, for sure.
Yeah. I definitely see there could be a very good positive economic impact and also social impacts like reduced crime.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
so it can help us create a safer environment.
Mhm.
So I like to close out the show with a few questions, and I'm going to customize a couple of questions for you because it's a different background than we've generally had with nutrition. But they're quick answer questions that we it's to help listeners gain knowledge of resources to go to, of consensus on certain things. So my first question is always, who are your top 5 health heroes?
Ooh. My top 5 health heroes. Gosh, that's a good one. Um, Gosh, in the keto world, I've read a bunch of Mark Sisson stuff. Um, I don't know if I can name you 5, but I've adapted um, slow running uh, because of him, and really have taken in just about everything he's put out there in terms of fitting um, exercise with nutrition and thinking about it from a keto standpoint and working out from in a fasted state. Um, Number 2, um, man, that's a good one. Gosh, you caught me.
That's all right.
uh,
You
you know
know, it
what?
could
I
be.
got I got a number 2. I got a number 2. His name is Herb Robinson. And Herb Robinson is somebody I've known for 20 something years, and he's been a distance runner since I've known him. And he's in his 60s now. And he still runs a sub hour 35 half marathon at the age of 63, 64.
Well,
Yeah. So those would be my 2. I don't know if I can go to 5.
okay. Well, do you have one for mental health therapy or motivational speaking? Because those I count too, because that's all part of health.
Oh, in that case, I'll give a shout out to Brandon Marshall, um, former NFL wide receiver, played for Chicago, played for Miami. He has really, I think he's done an extraordinary job of normalizing borderline personality disorder, and so um, it is one of the hardest mental health issues to work through and to be in relationship with, because there's essentially no middle emotionally. So I'd rate, because he was one of the early ones to come out and say, yeah, I'm struggling and I'm getting help. Okay. That's 3.
All right. There we go. I'll take it. So, what, from a nutritional standpoint now, it's a nutritional question. What 3 foods do you think everybody should incorporate into their diet?
Eggs is one. Um, uh, I love arugula as a leafy green. And then I'm a big fan of grass-fed, grass-finished steaks.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of all those things. You got eggs, which have almost the same nutritional count as organ meats like liver,
Mm-hmm.
and they're a Swiss Army knife in the kitchen. You can do just
Absolutely.
about anything with them. So
Yes.
they're a culinary powerhouse in more than one way. And then the
Hmm.
arugula, um, I was reading recently that leafy greens such as arugula are actually very good at helping remove excess estrogen in the system to help clear things out, as
Really?
well as binding. So it's great for hormonal balance because it has chemicals in it that bind with free estrogens to help them remove. So
Mhm.
that's the theory, at least. And the grass-fed, grass-finished steaks, we got Walker Farms, which is nearby us, and telling you,
Nice.
man, when you have that terroir of the soil in the meat, and you can have different flavors depending on it.
Mm.
It's like having a fine wine, man.
You're
So
making me hungry.
there it is. What are three foods do you think everybody should avoid?
uh, Anything in a package is essentially. So, potato chips. Now, from a diabetic standpoint, potato chips, donuts. Um, what's another big no-no? Uh, you know what? I'll cake, like traditional cake. I was going to plug Carrie Brown's ice cream cookbook because we've been killing keto ice cream, and my wife even made a keto cake. It was
Awesome.
amazing. And
Yeah.
I wear a continuous glucose monitor, almost no response from a glucose standpoint.
Yeah, her ice creams, she's definitely got. I've tried a number of the commercial keto ice creams. Nothing comes close. Nothing
Hmm.
comes close. Everything's
Yeah,
icy, hard,
right. The
and
texture.
that erythritol coldness to them. Her
Yeah.
my favorite, one of my favorites from her is I was always a big fan of Ben and Jerry's Cherry Garcia, and her
Mm-hmm.
double chocolate cherry chunk is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
So she's been doing that ice cream master class too, where she's actually been coaching people on how to and troubleshooting with them and stuff. So that's been pretty cool. So
Yeah.
if there was one big myth in therapy that you would like to, if you could just get rid of it overnight, what would that be?
The one big myth is that going to going to therapy doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, um, and that you're not crazy. Especially for men, you're not crazy. You're not weak. That'd be the one big thing. If I could wave my magic wand overnight, that'd be one thing I'd change.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a big one, and especially men have such a hard time talking and reporting on what's bothering them. So many men are even survivors of abuse, sexual
Mm.
assault, that don't report
Hmm.
because of the fear that diminishes them somehow to speak about it.
Absolutely. Yes. For sure.
So, and we kind of, I have a feeling we already touched on this one, but I always say, what's something about the medical industry, if you could change overnight, what would that be?
Oh, uh, in a heartbeat, I would make it less of a business. I, yeah, from my perspective, it's well, I would make it less of a business and make it more holistic and make it less. Oh, you asked me one thing. There's like three. I would make
No,
it more
that's
holistic.
honestly,
I would make it less of a business, make it holistic, and really think hard about if the that the first line of defense needs to be a medicine versus something more holistic.
I think all of those kind of come into play because it's the business aspect that tends to jump to the more um, aggressive forms of treatment, like with
Hmm.
interventions like medication and things, rather than lifestyle changes.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
for sure.
now, Toby, if people want to get in contact with you, if they want to talk about therapy, if they want to listen to your podcast, can you give us all the contact info?
Oh, absolutely. For therapy, I'm at www.jenkinscft.com. My radio show, it airs in a couple of cities, Atlanta, Cincinnati, Fairfax, and coming to Denver soon. And you can also find it on iTunes. You can search Paradigm Radio Show or my name, Toby Jenkins. The radio show also has a website, which is paradigmradioshow.com. And I post by the same name on Twitter, Paradigm Radio Show, and also on Facebook, Paradigm Radio Show. I post weekly, or at least I try to weekly on Instagram, just tidbits of just they're called 1 minute insights, just things I end up saying in therapy all the time, and uh, and I wish I could just hit repeat in the therapy room, but I post a little tidbit weekly of just little insights from therapy.
Nice. So definitely, I recommend everybody please check out Toby's radio show, which also gets aired as a podcast. So if you can't get it in your area, check out the podcast version. That's how I took everything in when I was on the road. Definitely look into therapy as an option for you. I'm not going to tell everybody, oh, you must go out and get therapy, because it's something that's a personal choice, and you cannot be pushed into it to make it effective. You have to choose to pursue it yourself. But I want to encourage everybody to view it as an option. And if you don't think you can afford it, if you don't think it's in your price range, if you view it as a luxury, if you view it as unmanly, try to dispel those myths. There are resources for you that are low cost that you can look into. Not only can you look into Toby, but there's a great app called Headspace that can help you get some online therapy, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. So it may be putting therapy in a very private way, more accessible to you, and you can get it into your home. So, and Toby, I'm sure now with our COVID thing, you're doing a lot more, as well as Ted naming, kind of telemedicine type approaches to things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that from a telehealth standpoint, it's forcing the industry to embrace the technology. So right now, it's kind of governed state by state. But I predict probably pretty soon you'll probably see it more national. So I think the cat's out of the bag on it, which is a good thing for to make it more accessible.
Yeah, it's definitely created a democratization of medical help, and even people who are having trouble to get to a medical doctor. Dr. Ted Damon and I talked about this on the podcast, because they have to jump buses and they have to take time off of work and they have to do this, are now able to see a doctor and sit down with a doctor through their home on their schedule without having to deal with all the transportation issues if they're in a poor socioeconomic standpoint, and those things have been a hindrance to them before.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd say from a technology standpoint, all you really need is a smartphone these days. And heck, my clients are all over the place. They're in the car, they're in the park. So yeah, it's a lot more accessible. Thank you to COVID and really pushing telehealth out there.
It's been fantastic having you, and I want to thank you for coming on the show, Toby.
Oh, it's been great, man. Thank you. Hope we help one person out there. Awesome.
I think we will. I definitely do.
Cool.
Thank you for joining us on the Fatty Joe Show. Be sure to leave a comment and subscribe. It helps the show reach more people. To support the show, as well as Carrie Brown and Yogi's work on the blog, keto recipe development, masterclasses, and to gain access to private Facebook groups and other awards, go to patreon.com/thefattyjoeshow or patreon.com/Carrie Brown. Also, check out our Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker YouTube channel for video versions of the Fatty Joe Show, recipe videos, and more. Join our awesome community on the Facebook group, The Keto Kitchen with Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker, and check out our carriebrown.com website for recipes, blog posts, discounts, cookbooks, masterclasses, and other great stuff. Thank you.